Hello! Welcome back to Cause. Today we're going to be returning to the ancient history of the Aztecs and delve into one of their most defining features, their religion. Now before I begin, I do want to point out a few key notes that I've learned so far. Although we technically have a good understanding on who the Mexica worshipped, we can't say for certain what they might have believed in. See, most religions have one or two definitive creation stories that tell us, okay, who created what, when they created it, and who is currently the god we should try not to piss off. When it comes to the Aztecs on creation myths, however, we aren't exactly sure what myth is the actual canon myth. See, this is because historians got their information from commoners or people who weren't high enough on the religious triangle to know what was the actual story. No Mexica priest ever talked with historians and told them about their religion. This is important because currently the Mexica have three main creation myths and another story about their patron god which conflicts with the storyline. With that out of the way, let's get straight into it. Let's start off with our first creation myth of the day, the legend of the four suns. In the beginning there was nothing but the possibly unisex god, Ometeotl, who created the four Tezcatlipocas that represent the four cardinal directions. In the east we have Xipetotec, who was the red Tezcatlipoca. In the south we have Huitzilopochtli, who was the blue. In the west we have Quetzalcoatl, who was the white. And in the north we have the black Tezcatlipoca, who was actually named Tezcatlipoca. Confusing, I know. With the gods being created, they set out to create humanity, and the gods who were tasked to do this were Huitzilopochtli and Quetzalcoatl. Once they had created the first version of humanity, they needed someone to sacrifice themselves and become the sun. When the gods sacrifice themselves in these myths, it's usually not permanent because they eventually come back to life. The real Tezcatlipoca was the first sun, and life was pretty good with humanity being giants. But then Quetzalcoatl was like, hey, let me have a turn, and knocked Tezcatlipoca out of the sky. Pissed off, he decided to just kill everybody on the planet by making it rain jaguars. The second sun became Quetzalcoatl, and humanity came back, but this time they were normal size. Life was once again good, but humanity started worshipping the gods less and less, and Tezcatlipoca got pissed off, and said, screw it, let's start over, and ended the world with hurricanes, with the remaining humans being turned into monkeys. The third sun was under the rule of Tlaloc, and this one ended with Tezcatlipoca being an a-hole and stealing Tlaloc's wife. In a fit of rage, Tlaloc stopped rain from falling and everything dried up, and humanity kept begging him to make it rain. He then decided to give them a little taste of irony and having it rain fire. Then humans from this age were turned into dogs, butterflies, and turkeys. The fourth sun came under the rule of a female goddess this time, who was the new wife of Tlaloc named Xalchihuitlcu. Humans in this era survived off wild seeds, but like the other suns, this one didn't last because, once again, Tezcatlipoca caused the end of the world by telling her that the people didn't really love her. Xalchihuitlcu's tears flooded the world in blood, and humans became fish. Currently we live under the fifth sun, and it's being run by Tonatiuh, the sun god, and we are actually the maize eaters. However, the creation of humans under this sun has a little bit more of a backstory. So there's two versions of the story, but this one lines up better with the one I just talked about. So yeah, in this version, after the world was flooded in blood, Quetzalcoatl decided humanity needed to come back, and so he either went alone in some stories, or with his brother Xolotl, god of dogs, to Mictlan where they talked to Mictlantecuhtli, and asked them if they could get the bones of the previous humans. Mictlantecuhtli then said, sure, but first blow out of this conch shell. When Quetzalcoatl tried to blow out of it, he found out that there was no holes, and so he called on worms to make holes and bees to make noise out of it. Reluctantly, Mictlantecuhtli said fine, you can get the bones. But then when Quetzalcoatl went to get them, Mictlantecuhtli changed his mind and made quails attack him. Quetzalcoatl ran, but fell and went unconscious while also dropping the bones, breaking them. Eventually he regained consciousness after a few minutes and picked up the various sized bones. Quetzalcoatl brought them to Tomoanchan, which was like heaven, and gave them to Cihuacoatl, who ground the bones in a bowl and placed the powder into a jade bowl. Then all the gods shed some of their blood to give life to humanity, who because of the broken bones gave rise to various sized people. Now in this creation story, everything is basically the same, but it just provides a little backstory to Tonatiuh, the sun god. There needed to be a new sun, and so there were two candidates. One was Tequistecatl, who was rich and powerful, and the other was Nanahuatzin, who was sickly and weak. When it came time to being sacrificed onto the great pyre, Tequistecatl backed away in cowardice while Nanahuatzin just jumped right in and became Tonatiuh, the new sun. Seeing Nanahuatzin's bravery, Tequistecatl jumped right in after him, but because there was now two suns in the sky, the gods thought it would be too bright and threw a rabbit onto Tequistecatl, who became the moon. But instead of everything acting the way it does, Tonatiuh wasn't moving across the sky, and it was because he needed blood. The gods then sacrificed their hearts to Tonatiuh, and everything ran the way it needed. Which explains why the Aztecs needed so much human sacrifice, cause if not, the sun won't budge. Now you're all probably wondering, wait a minute, those all seem to match up. Why'd you say the myths don't match up? Well, to that I say, let me finish. You know all those stories I just told you? Well, now throw all of that away because it has nothing to do with this. In this creation myth, we don't even talk about humans, we just talk about Huitzilopochtli. One day, Coatlicue, goddess of the earth, was just sweeping the floors of the temple of Coatepec, minding her own business, when a ball of feathers landed on her belly and impregnated her. Yeah, that's right, a ball of feathers. Anyways, her other 400 children and Coyolxauhqui found out about this and didn't like that she was pregnant. When they finally caught up to her and were about to kill her, Huitzilopochtli emerged from Coatlicue's womb fully armed with weapons and killed all his 400 siblings and then cut up his sister Coyolxauhqui into pieces. Then the 400 siblings became the stars, with Coyolxauhqui becoming the moon, and every night the same battle happens over and over, with only the blood of sacrifices allowing Huitzilopochtli to have the strength to fight off the darkness. See, told you the myths collide. Now that we've covered the main myths the Aztecs believed in, we can talk about how the religion came to be. You see, many of the gods we see in the Aztec religion are much older than the culture itself. Much of the basis of the religion was derived from the people of Teotihuacan. In many of the temple walls and architecture of Teotihuacan, we can see evidence that they used to worship the gods like Tlaloc and Quetzalcoatl, making them older than even the patron god of the Aztecs, Huitzilopochtli. Another interesting fact is that Quetzalcoatl is possibly even older than Tlaloc, with evidence suggesting that the Olmecs worshipped a feathered serpent deity. Even the Mayans have their own version of Tlaloc and Quetzalcoatl, named Chac and Kukulcan. The biggest difference in the religion came when the Aztlanian migrants came down to Mesoamerica. When they immigrated to the Valley of Mexico, they also brought with them new gods, one of the most important being Huitzilopochtli. He went from being a patron god to a high god the moment the Aztecs rose to power. Tlaloc kept his position as a high god just because he was a god of rain and fertility, which is very important because if you don't have rain, you don't have food. When it comes to determining who controls what in the Aztec pantheon, things get rather hazy. See, when we think of the pantheon of gods like the Norse or Greek, we know who's on top. We have the Aesir for the Norse with Odin at the very top, while we have the Olympians with Zeus as the king. However, the Aztec gods are somewhat spread out. No one god holds the title of one domain. Even though Huitzilopochtli is a god of war, he is also a sun god. Tlaloc is a rain and thunder god, but Xolotl, god of dogs, has the ability to control lightning and fire. The gods of this pantheon sometimes merge when it comes to abilities, and indeed, sometimes different gods may even be just versions of the same god. We see this in the creation myth when Nanahuatzin becomes Tonatiuh the moment he becomes the sun. It also might have depended where you were in the empire, with some cities having their patron gods that might have differed from the gods we believed were at the top. This isn't to say that there wasn't structure within the religion, but it might have just depended on who the people deemed was more important to worship. Like how certain Catholic areas have their own patron saints. They all worship God, but they also might see some saints more important than others. Some of the most important deities were Huitzilopochtli, god of war, Tezcatlipoca, omnipotent god of kings, Quetzalcoatl, god of creation and priests, along with other aspects, Xipetotec, god of agricultural fertility, Tlaloc, rain, water, and agricultural fertility, and Mictlantecutli, god of death and the underworld. So obviously we all know that death and sacrifice were very important. After all, it's what most people commonly think about when they think about the Aztecs. However, they saw death differently compared to how we would judge them with our current societal standards. When the Aztecs sacrificed a human, it was more out of necessity rather than cruelty, because they believed it would help the world work the way it does. They also saw it as a huge honor to be sacrificed to the gods, because you were helping in a noble cause. They also believed that once you died, you'd end up in a much better afterlife, and the afterlives they believed in varied. The most honorable afterlife was earned if you were sacrificed to the gods or if you died at war. You'd turn into a hummingbird or butterfly and accompany the sun as it reached its zenith, or you'd fight alongside Huitzilopochtli as he traveled across the sky, depending on what you believe in right now with the current myths. Women and babies who died after or during childbirth also gained this honorable death, because giving birth was comparable to fighting on the battlefield. They would then accompany the sun as it began to set. Although this next life wasn't as honorable, I feel like it was the best one. If you died due to a weather-related cause or drowned, you'd be sent to Tlalocan, which was a paradise plain. Most people, however, ended up in one of the 9 levels of Mictlan, and the worst part about it was that you had to pass several challenges, with each time it getting more and more difficult. People would often be buried or burned with all their earthly possessions, no matter how expensive it might have been. You own 20 kwashi that could have supported the family? Well, too bad, it's gone. You own 2 gold bracelets? Well, the gold's back in the ground. You own Chichi the Chihuahua? Well, there goes your perfectly good lunch. Yeah, that's right, those little dogs you like so much were actually intended for food. If you were a noble though, you'd be buried or cremated with all your belongings along with a couple of slaves so they could serve you in the afterlife, similar to how the Nordic people would do it back in the day. Mythology has always been one of my biggest interests growing up, and while researching the mythology, I was just amazed by just how important their religion was to them. At first I was thrown off by the amount of inconsistencies they had, but once you start focusing on one series of myths as canon, then it all lines up. One of the biggest shocks was when I found out that Tezcatlipoca was omnipotent, a being who has the power to do whatever the heck he wants. The biggest thing I wish you could take from this episode is that when judging one's culture, you should try not to think of it from your perspective at first. Try to understand why they do what they do, and once you have a good understanding, then you should be able to create an opinion. However, I'm not your mom, so do what you want to do. Now before I end the video, I wanted to make a few quick announcements. I'm going to be starting to post Monkey Mondays, where we take a look at the stories of different primates and just talk about them. Also, for episode 3 of the Aztecs, if you have any suggestions on what I should do for the next episode, please feel free to comment down below. Anyways, if you enjoyed the video, leave a like because it helps me out a lot, and maybe consider subscribing. I know this is a relatively new channel, but if you like history and random stuff, well, I'll be here. Alright, with that out of the way, thank you for watching. This is Kaz, and I'll see you in the next one. Ciao!